Students are going to be making presentations this afternoon. The Sustainability Law Practicum class here at Widener. In this class, students draft sustainability ordinances as well as narratives justifying those ordinances, and they do it for specific local governments or local government associations. We are one of very few law schools in the country to offer a class like this. Today, they're going to be presenting their proposals to a panel of local government officials who will introduce themselves in just a minute. The topics were chosen by representatives from Cumberland County, the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs, Carlisle Borough, and the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission. These same representatives worked with the students in the development of their proposals. We are grateful to them, as well as to the representatives from the Legislative Reference Bureau, several of whom are here. Thank you very much. Which has reviewed and commented on drafts of the student ordinances. 8 proposals are being presented by 16 students this afternoon. Each presentation has 2 parts. The first part is a narrative that explains the need for the ordinance and the social, economic, and environmental benefits that the ordinance would provide. The second explains the ordinance itself. Each student is allowed 4 minutes or 8 minutes per team. The local government officials on the panel will then ask them questions. The total time for each project presentation, including questions and answers, is 15 minutes. The narratives and the ordinances being presented today are in draft form. So if you have suggestions or comments, the students are very eager to hear from you. I'm going to ask the panelists now to introduce themselves, maybe starting over on my left, and then we'll begin.
Sure. My name is Kyle Miller. I am the Vice President of Mechanicsburg Borough Council, and professionally, I am the Senior Marketing Specialist for land practice at Cushman and Wakefield, and our team specializes in industrial real estate.
I'm Jerry Duke. I'm the Dauphin County Planning Coordinator with Tri-County Regional Planning Commission. I've been doing this working with John for my 6th year, I think now, and really enjoy all the things that you guys present. And I will tell you that we take a lot of what you say seriously, and we incorporate it in a lot of our work. So we're anxious to learn what you're doing, what you have come up with. So thank you.
My name is Faith Kern. I'm chairperson of the New Cumberland Borough Planning Commission. I also serve on the Revitalization Committee of New Cumberland Borough. Professionally, I work for a public affairs and communications firm in downtown Harrisburg.
Good evening or good afternoon still. My name is Jennifer Hoover. I am newly elected to Camp Hill Borough Council. And so I will start in that capacity in January. So say a prayer, please. Professionally, I am the Director of Government Relations for Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, which oversees the 14 state-owned universities. And this brings a flashback to me just real quick. As a legislative fellow upon graduating from Penn State, I did a similar thing where we had to draft legislation and present it to state legislators. So good to see you. Thank you for having me.
All right, I guess, John, we're about ready to go. Are these live? Do you know, John? Are these?
Yes, we're live.
I mean, but are these things here? What are, okay, all right. Okay, so I think at this point, we'll ask our first group to come up and start presentation. And if you would quickly introduce yourself as well and your topic, and then let it go.
Hi, my name is Hunter Schreffler, and this is Sean Peterson. We were asked by the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs on how to better implement microgrids into our community. Yeah, so here's essentially what I just said. So what is a microgrid? A microgrid is a self-sufficient energy system that serves a discrete geographic footprint, such as neighborhoods, hospitals, college campuses, and within a microgrid are one or more kinds of distributed energy that they can get, usually from solar or wind turbines. And additionally, this energy can be stored into a battery system to be used at a later time. So two important things to know about a microgrid is the first, that it is local, meaning it's usually closely connected to the facility that it is operating for. It's estimated from a macro grid that 8 to 15% of energy is lost through transmission just because of the long distance it has to travel to reach that facility. Additionally, a microgrid is independent, meaning although it may be connected to a macro grid, it can operate in an island mode in case of power outages to supply energy to the facilities that it's connected to. Here's just a little diagram of how a microgrid control center could operate. So why should municipalities invest in microgrids? Just this last winter in February of 2021, Houston, Texas saw a major power outage that lasted 4 days and affected 4.5 million citizens. It also caused over 200 people to freeze to death. Additionally, nearly a dozen generators at a water treatment facility failed, and this caused property damage because of frozen pipes that busted because the water treatment failed, so they couldn't heat up those pipes. It caused about 50,000 homes and 400 apartment complexes to be damaged and an estimated $19 million in damages. So how have other municipalities implemented microgrids? The main issue identified by the PSAB that municipalities face when implementing microgrids is a lack of funding or a lack of know-how to fund these projects. So they just wanted general guidance on how other municipalities have done this. Sean and I identified 2 state-funded programs and public-private partnerships. We mainly focused on public-private partnerships, specifically energy as a service model, or EAAS, which would be created through local ordinances, which would have control of the design, finance, constructs, and operation of the microgrid. And it would receive revenue from the consumers of the microgrid as compensation. And the local government would have to permit third parties to interconnect to this grid, or have third parties obtain an alternative retail electric supplier certificate, which enables them to sell this energy to consumers. So a county that we found that has done this successfully was Montgomery County, Maryland, which installed a microgrid in its public safety headquarters using the EAAS model. They contracted with a third-party contractor to build and maintain the solar panels and microgrids. And while it's connected to the main grid, it can operate in an island mode, similar to what I talked about earlier. And it's used for the Homeland Security Police Station and Office of Emergency Management. And it's expected to reduce greenhouse emissions by 5,900 metric tons. Also, something that I didn't mention earlier is this kind of model is great for municipalities that don't have a lot of funding for this project, because most of the cost is devoted to those third parties. So.
All right, my name is Sean Peterson. I'll be running us through the ordinance portion of this presentation. The purpose between our ordinance is to promote and incentivize the facilitation of microgrid systems throughout Pennsylvania, as he said, and specifically through the proliferation of sustainable energy sources to fuel those microgrids. The primary authorizing legal authority for this is the Pennsylvania Borough Code, the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards Act, and the Public Utility Commission regulations. The main operative part of our ordinance for this microgrid incentivization is the appointing of an engineer for the borough. Generally, they're going to be appointed by the governing council of the borough that enacts the model ordinance. And then that engineer will report to the borough manager, who reports to the city council on the progress of the microgrid projects. Additionally, the duties of that engineer is going to be to oversee the creation of the microgrid system, and they're actually going to decide which incentives are granted to each project. The incentives that can be granted to those projects are the Borough Contribution, Energy as a Service, which Hunter mentioned earlier,
utility rate recovery, and greater density incentives. And in order to get any of these, you have to first meet the primary requirements listed in that first box. And that's mainly just going over stuff like it has to be a feasible project with studies behind it. It has to be resilient against natural disasters in order to fulfill that purpose of being aside from the macrogrid and making it for the failures of the macrogrid. And more than anything, we're trying to utilize sustainable energy sources to fuel those microgrids. There are a few more primary requirements, but there are also additional requirements under energy as a service. In order to get that specific incentive, you'll have to be a third-party facilitator who is not already a public utility provider. So they would be selling their excess energy back into the system to that primary utility provider in that area. Borough contribution is going to be the borough basically just throwing money at the problem, letting somebody else deal with the construction and what have you of that project. And then they will reap the benefits of or rather they will recoup their investment through the profits made from that third party who actually created the microgrid. Utility rate recovery is going to be a lot like energy as a service, where you're going to remake your money off of the rates charged for the electricity usage, but that's only going to be for already involved utility providers within the state. So they'll just be able to add on additional fees, reasonable fees, in order to recoup their investment on making that microgrid. And then the greater density incentive is going to apply to developers of new developments who fuel, or rather run the development through a microgrid system that falls under this ordinance, and it allows them to have a greater density of dwellings within that development. Quick thing about the difference between EAS and URR is the energy as a service, again, is only going to be for companies that are not currently energy providers on the microgrid, and URR is for those providers. Those incentives can be granted to public-private partnership microgrid projects and solely private microgrid projects. The private-public partnerships are going to be eligible for utility rate recovery and borough contribution, while the solely private microgrid projects are going to be eligible for utility rate recovery, energy as a service, and greater density incentives. Thank you.
I guess I can't see the clock. Is that
It just hit red.
just hit red? Okay. All right. Thank you. Real quick, what I'd like to do is kind of compliment you on the topic. This is a very, very important topic, as you mentioned, everything that's going on in Houston and across the country involved with the local government. Couple things, question for you. Who do you see as the governments to be able to do it? When you researched, did you come across any scale? Does a borough of Camp Hill or something like that able to do it, or is it going to have to be something like a Montgomery County?
So we're trying to do something, we're trying to make it so that this can be used by any size borough. Basically, that's the reason for multiple different types of incentives, is they can pick and choose based on their own abilities to be able to actually start these projects. And that kind of comes from the idea that utility rate recovery, again, that's going to be done mostly by the utility company. So they're going to basically just give them the opportunity to build that microgrid and then charge excess on top of that. So the borough really, funding wise, isn't super deep in the hole, but if it's a borough that has more funds, they can use the borough contribution. But one that might not have as much would be able to use energy as a service, or utility rate recovery, or greater density incentives.
Else has any questions, any comments you want to make? I know we want to keep things moving along, because I don't want to.
How big is the microgrid? You showed the picture. I'm unfamiliar with them. I appreciate the presentation. What size are we looking at? And because you said in the one county it was located within a headquarters. So
From my understanding, they're not massive, because it can fit in like the building essentially to operate that facility. So I think it really would depend on like, in that case in Montgomery County, it was strictly for those 3 facilities. So it was a smaller one. But in other examples that we found, Chicago did it and it operated like something like 40 blocks or something like that. So depending on like what scale you would want and how many consumers you would want to have the benefit of it, you may have to like upscale the size of the microgrid and the storage unit to give energy to those facilities.
Likewise, the cost would change. So what's the minimum and maximum cost? Talk about the funding.
Mhm.
Yeah, the cost to borough.
We weren't really looking at costs to the borough because that was one of the biggest problems in implementing those in a lot of areas. So we were looking more at trying to give them a way to kind of design it for themselves within our ordinance. So we don't really have any exact numbers on that.
Okay, anyone else? All right, we thank you very much.
you.
Nice job. Okay, we have next repurposing of existing and unique buildings.
Good afternoon. My name is Shazi Raza. My partner Jack and I worked on adaptive reuse through transitional zoning. This here's if you're unfamiliar with adaptive reuse, this here's a picture of an old hospital in Chicago that was reused, and you can see the elements of the old building within the community college that it was built around. We're facing a twofold problem in Carlisle. The first problem is that there's an increasing number of vacant buildings that were built for a specific purpose. And this is an issue because these buildings are no longer economically viable, which developers would like a possibility to revitalize and build it. And the second is that a lot of these properties are located in residential areas. And that makes it difficult to revitalize a property without rezoning for adaptive reuse. The 2 ordinances we looked at to compare to were taken from townships similar in size to Carlisle. The first was Whitehall. And it was important because we looked at housing as well. And we looked at specific wording that could be taken from it and used. And such language was that the building must be at least 50 years old, vacant or underutilized, and must be at least 5,000 square feet in size. This is important because we don't want developers to be able to convert an economically viable property with adaptive reuse. This Whitehall ordinance was specific to market rate multifamily and low income housing. The second was Witchland Township. This was a much broader ordinance that Carlisle could look to. The specific language that could be used here was other uses of a similar nature and similar community impact, which gives us 2 different perspectives to look at. Whitehall's is very specific towards housing, and this is very broad and only for historic preservation. Here's a graph that shows the CO2 impact of adaptive reuse versus new construction. You can see here in the dark green is a refurbishment of a property, and in light green is a new build of a property. And you can see from the construction period, 35 years out, that it emits more CO2 over the life of the property, even when you factor in at roughly 23 years in that you refurbish the property again, which gives it more economic viability and lowers the CO2 emissions for refurbishment compared to the new build. The positive impacts of the ordinances, the economic benefits will be increasing the local tax revenue, supporting job creation and retention. Social benefits that specifically were from the Whitehall ordinance is that it reduces childhood poverty in the case of low-income housing. Environmental benefits would be that multifamily properties with 5 or more units use about half as much energy as other types of homes. The solution for Carlisle is that the proposed transitional zoning ordinance will allow for the following. It will alleviate the impact of vacant buildings that they have on the environment. It will bolster the local economy and increase the surrounding property value, and it will assist in creating valuable community businesses and affordable housing. My partner Jack will discuss the ordinance now.
Good afternoon. My name's Jack Kennelly. So Shazi and I have been working with the Borough of Carlisle to draft this ordinance for repurposing their buildings. The main component of this ordinance is structured around adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is the process of reusing an old site or building for a purpose other than its original designation. It is the conversion of the principal building that was originally constructed or used for a purpose, for a new purpose. Adaptive reuse is not the raising or redeveloping of an entire structure. However, it may include selective demolition up to 50% of the addition of the new structure. A key goal for Carlisle is the protection of the local environment. Carlisle is one of 20 communities that are part of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection's Local Climate Action Assistance Program. And through this program, they created a Climate Action Commission that is tasked with lowering the emissions to certain levels over the next couple of years. So for our ordinance, an eligible building is defined as any building that's 5,000 square feet or more within a project incentive area that has been vacant for at least 75% of the time in the last 2 years, or which has been determined to be a historically significant building. Our ordinance requires that the repurposed building fall within numerous zoning rights Carlisle already has established. We felt this was important because it makes the ordinance more clear to the community, the developers, and the public for what the requirements for these repurposed buildings would be. They obviously can be used for what their original permitted purpose was. So part of the language in the ordinance allows for eligible buildings to be used as a special use exception within the zoning rights. Developers must come prepared with a site plan prepared by a registered design professional indicating the lot area, parking proposed, the division of the structure, and if proposed surrounded uses and elevation drawings. In granting the special use exception, the board may require reasonable conditions put onto the property for safeguards and anything that they seem necessary to implement. So before they're granted permission to convert the old structure into a new one, approval must be sought from the zoning hearing board. We felt this was an important part of our ordinance because the zoning hearing board is an appropriate entity that allows for repurposing what the original zoning use was. The zoning hearing board is already tasked with this essential nature, so they're already in a great position to approve or deny these requests. Also, there must be a public hearing that is held prior to approval. This will allow the community to chime in with any concerns or questions they have about undergoing this project. One of the incentives we included in this ordinance was that based on the proposal and the zoning board's feelings about the property, they could potentially waive this hearing if there's no output from the community. Enforcement will be through the borough. Specifically, the zoning hearing board will make sure the building falls within the necessary requirements to go through the process once they established what the new project will be. The buildings will also have to follow the basic building codes and local standards. Should there be a violation, written notice must be delivered to the property owners and they can raise any disputes they have with the zoning hearing board. Carlisle would benefit from the adoption of an adaptive reuse ordinance with a focus on repurposing of buildings. This ordinance can help solve local issues and provide support to a community through buildings that were once important to that community. Thank you for the time today, and we would appreciate any feedback you had.
All right, well, thank you very much. Well done. Since I'm sitting amongst all these borough people, I think I'll pass any time. Faith, do you have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I did have a question about setbacks and height requirements. So they would follow what the original building was, or would you have to go through a zoning variance to have it
Correct.
changes with the new qualifications?
So part of the ordinance talks about that the height requirements, setbacks and stuff would be deemed what they were at the current time of their building, unless the zoning hearing board felt necessary to change due to new restrictions and standards in the local community.
Yeah. Kyle?
A lot of the issues we have are with parking. How would that impact the adaptive reuse? And do you make any compensate, do you make any adjustment in the ordinance for development, say in a downtown district where there's, a lack of parking and the adaptive reuse may create the need for additional parking?
Well, what we focused on was that the zoning hearing board would be in charge of anyone that comes forward, any developer that comes forward, and they would have to have a solution to the parking issues that, for example, in downtown, historic properties did not have that factored in. So they would need to present a plan that would allow it to pass the zoning hearing board and move forward.
Our last borough person, do you have any questions? No. Okay. I do appreciate your time. One thing I did notice from your drafts, and I'm glad you corrected, you had it first as your conditional use, conditional use to the, and you caught that. So that was good. So
Thank you.
congratulations
Appreciate
on that catch before I had to beat you on that.
Thank you.
So again, very well done. Thank you very much. And nice presentation.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Okay, next one we're going to go to is the use of accessory dwellings to encourage high density housing.
I am Alexandra Parker, and this is my partner, Gabriella Nader. I'm assuming there's a lot of people who are currently or previously married listening, and I'm sure you've thought to yourself, man, I wish I lived closer to my in-laws. And now you can with an accessory dwelling unit.
Really?
Yeah. So an accessory dwelling unit is a smaller living space that is located on a principal living place like your home. They usually include a kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, and a living space. They're otherwise known as granny flats, mini homes, in-law units, relative care units. We have some ADU-friendly areas. There's Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Bethlehem, and Buckingham Township. Philadelphia has the lowest burden on the applicant, much easier to get approved, which we call the Philadelphia model. And then the highest burden on the applicant with the most restrictions is the Bethlehem model. Some of the benefits are elder care, like I mentioned, for people who are sick, disabled, or have a fixed income to keep them in proximity and in their community. For young adults in transitional periods. It helps the economy by increasing engagement with local businesses and decreasing travel time. It lowers the carbon footprint by promoting less automobile reliant communities. And of course, with COVID-19, multi-generational setups is very useful. Some of the things preventing ADUs from being widely implemented are parking, character of the neighborhood, occupants, permits, and size and location. So with parking. Parking is a huge concern. This is something that we've discussed with Carlisle, and it's a part of a greater issue at this moment. So that's still in the works. With appearance, some places are more concerned with keeping the residential look to their neighborhood than others. So that's a very big deal to a lot of places implementing ADUs. With occupants, everywhere in Pennsylvania only allows one ADU. Some places, they will make sure that ADUs only have relatives in them, and then others keep it vague, like Philadelphia will allow anyone. Permits, there's by right, which just means, there's an application or a notice with a reasonable fee. And then there is by permit, which is you have to go and apply and get approved, and it's a longer process with a higher burden. There are pros and cons to each. Like I said, longer process requires funding and makes the burden high enough that people don't want to have ADUs. Size and location, most places do 180 square foot floor area. And some other places do more specific things, but most keep it open. What's best for Carlisle, we've compared, population, median age, looking at elderly and young populations. And as far as it goes, we lean more towards the Philadelphia model, but my partner Gabriella will explain more about what we are thinking for Carlisle. So.
With respect to the ordinance for Carlisle, we focused on the general population of Carlisle. And from that, we got certain restrictions, and things like that, because they want to maintain the character of the neighborhood, but they also want to address certain concerns. ADUs is a picture, they can occur in different setups. They can be under the house, they can be next on the garage. And this comes from when we entered the Paris Accord, the trickle down effect from that was that we wanted to reduce the carbon footprint by getting denser housing. When you have a single person living in a large house, you have a lot more energy to heat that house, to run the electricity, all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you have more people in the house, you do not have as much energy being wasted with regard to that. So if you increase the density of the population in the house, you preserve the energy. So we created a statute by right. It preserves the character of the neighborhood, and we've gone back and forth on addressing parking restrictions, but that's still at issue. What it does is it grants the right to build. They do file a notice with the borough to let them know, hey, we're going to build this. And that allows also the borough to, if they need to recap any fees, do another assessment, things like that. They have a restriction generally from 180 to 800. They wanted to keep it around 600. The safety codes, insofar as building or zoning, they have to be kept. So you're not going to skimp out on things like the framing of the house or the safety protocol. You want to keep it, it's not going to, it's also going to be kept about the same level as the original building. We want to keep the landlord on site, the principal owner there, to avoid having someone have homes turn into their complex. And it also works to preserve the character of the neighborhood by allowing for remedies in the zone of interest. Parking is still a bit of a sore subject, and that's gone back and forth again. There's also other provisions in there to allow, to encourage this is consumer protection insofar as keeping the, disallowing a contractor to shift all burden onto the consumer. Any fees and penalties assessed by it will go to a trust for the Climate Action Committee, which is for the Borough of Carlisle, holding those, enforcing those. And certain things to protect the tenant from having the landlord roll in all the costs. So if the tenant damages the property, they can be responsible, but if it's not damaged by the tenant, then it helps to preserve that. And questions?
Okay, oh, very well done, thank you. I guess, again, Jennifer,
Yeah.
any questions?
Maybe one question that came to my mind. You said it would be by right versus by permit. So the homeowner would essentially just go and notify them that they're doing it, whether that they're building a new space in their home, beside their home, behind their home.
Yes, as far as the difference, like they would just be giving notice, while a permit, a lot of places, it will require a deed restriction for the next person, if there is a next person who is the owner of the house. But when there's the permit process, it usually costs, I would say, a lot more than if it was by right. And it also adds just another time consuming period, I guess.
How do you balance that then with homeowners presently who have to seek building permits for renovations, et cetera, for their home and have to pay a fee to do that?
The fee would come out when you get, well, if they have it, you still have to get it approved and things like that. So those costs would still be on the homeowner, the cost of building it, things like that.
But they're not
Usually-
paying a fee to the borough. Or
Not on the front end to do, not with the application necessarily, but with respect to when you get it approved and things like that. That makes sense.
It makes sense. I just see an unlevel field between the homeowner and the potential ADU owner.
I have a question. Would the ADU fall under if Carlisle had a rental inspection ordinance, like Mechanicsburg has a rental inspection ordinance, would the property need to be inspected?
Yes, it would be the same normal inspection. I think Gabriella mentioned it, but it still has to follow the same zoning ordinance as the primary residence does, so.
Would it be considered, like for a sewer bill, would it be considered the same property or would it be considered two different properties? Because,
So it would hook in, so usually it would hook into the main sewer. Whether it's two different or one, honestly have not, distinguished that.
It would definitely, I would say that it would probably just be one. I think Gabriella mentioned, we do want to avoid this like landlordism type things because they are separate concepts, but it's more similar to like an accessory garage or a pool house, much bigger with a living space, obviously. But it's more like it leans towards an extension rather than its own separate entity.
right.
Yeah.
I just know of an existing circumstance where the primary homeowner, her mother passed away, has an accessory use structure. Her mother passed away and she doesn't want to rent the existing use structure out, but she is stuck paying the sewer bill for that structure because it is deemed separate entity from the house, even though it's an accessory structure to the house.
Yeah, something that I think might help with that. Some places have a provision in their ordinances that say that the ADU has to be able to be reverted back into a part of the house or a garage, something like that. So I think that if, we talked with Carlisle and saw if they wanted to do that, that would avoid that kind of issue where it's considered separate.
One quick question on the requirement. So if someone builds an ADU or constructs those on their property, then, they say have their grandmother there, she passes away. Are they required to use it? I mean, what's to prohibit someone from just kind of going around some impervious and setbacks and those type of rules and saying, oh, I just need a little more space for my 3 teenagers. So this will be a great clubhouse for them. I mean, how do you make sure that's being used for the intended purpose and the benefits of the community?
It's kind of the same thing, like we've been considering the provision that says you have to be able to turn it back if you're not using it anymore into, part of the house or a garage. And if you can't, you can't have it. So I mean, we also don't really want to restrict it, restriction on relatives. So as long as somebody's living there, I think it would be all right. But like you said, if they say like, it's going to be a great clubhouse for my kids, you're going to have to make it into a accessory building of some kind instead of continuing to classify it as an accessory dwelling unit.
As you can see, this is a tough topic.
Yeah.
If there was one thing you see as the toughest hurdle for municipalities to overcome by passing this, what would you say it is?
Parking,
Parking.
by far.
Parking.
One thing I've learned in this project is parking is so important to so many people.
I think we're talking about that later on.
Yeah. You have
Next one.
one side and then you have the other one and.
It's
Yeah.
very divisive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Parking is important. And parking is, especially in a borough situation where there isn't, in the American view of having so many cars and everything as you're adding more people in. It is important. Well, any other?
I had one little one.
Okay, yep, we got a couple minutes. I think so, right, John?
Yes, just thinking about, you said the principal owner having to be on site. Is that 365 days? Is that a percentage of the year?
It would be their main domicile.
Yeah.
So
I'm
majority
thinking
of the
like,
time,
yeah,
Yeah.
what was that?
majority of the time. I mean, we wouldn't
More than
prevent someone
50%
from.
of the year.
Huh?
More than 50% of the year.
Yeah, we're not gonna, you don't want to necessarily mandate and tell someone, no, you can't go down to your summer house for 3 months, but at the same time, you don't want them to be turning their homes into mini complexes.
Well, I know, speaking from, local experience and trying to deal with short-term rental ordinances, that's a provision that they consider and
Yeah.
increase that amount of time.
Okay.
Yeah, I think as you see all these ordinances, you kind of work your way through them. as we're talking about here, they all interweave and you have to kind of be careful for it. Now, you're working on standalone ordinances, so that's good. But as you move forward and coming to advise municipalities, that's one of the things that's always going to come up, parking and accessory dwellings as Airbnbs, and also how do you handle it? So I think you're off to a great start. So congratulations.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up Airbnbs because Pittsburgh specifically in their pitch presentation, because they did a trial period, had a specific bullet point that I found kind of funny that said it has to be, someone has to live there for more than 36 days because they were afraid people were just going to use it for Airbnb. Like they actually mentioned Airbnb. So.
Well, and that becomes, one of the things about accessory dwellings is to help the affordable housing issue, because we're all communities are facing that. And then you have, areas that are desirable also become a tourist location as well. So you have that pressure. So. Well, again, thank you. We appreciate your time and your effort, and it was a very nice job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think number 4 is, as we were talking about the affordable housing, we're going on to affordable housing next.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Davis, and my partner Naira Dennis and I had an affordable housing topic with a focus on incentivizing landlords to provide affordable housing. So just to give you a quick roadmap of what we're going to go over, I'm going to describe the problems specific to Carlisle Borough that we are asked to solve. I'm going to go over how the problem has been handled by some other municipalities who had similar issues, and talk about how the solution benefits sustainability. And then Naira will talk about our ordinance itself. So specific to Carlisle, they had a lot of buildings in downtown Carlisle where the street facing bottom part was used as a business and the upper level areas were remaining empty. And they were looking for a way to incentivize landlords and owners of those buildings to rent those areas to low-income residents. Just a little bit about Carlisle. The median household income is about $48,000, and the median gross rent is $844, which means an average person in Carlisle Borough is paying more than 21% of their income each month for rent, which a lot of municipalities have put 20% as housing insecure if you're paying 20% of your monthly income on your rent. So the solutions from other jurisdictions and municipalities were a lot of landlord incentive programs, which provide incentives to Section 8 housing voucher holders. And those incentives, the main one was a landlord signing bonus. So the first time a landlord would rent to a Section 8 housing voucher holder, they would receive some sort of compensation. A lot of it was like a $500 payment. There were also, in Bucks County specifically, there was landlords finder's fees for referring other landlords to the program. In McKean County, they had a rental rehabilitation incentive. So if the rental unit was not up to the Section 8 housing standards, they would provide a rehabilitation refund for updating the rental property to meet the Section 8 housing requirements. And they also had landlord monthly workshops, and if the landlords attend, they receive $50 per session. In Philadelphia, they had owner assurance, which was a fund to protect landlords from unexpected damages. Something else we referenced in our ordinance was fair housing ordinances and just prohibiting discrimination in housing. These are just some examples. And the sustainable benefits of this is it'll increase patrons of local downtown businesses, which should boost the economy since more people will be living downtown. It will incentivize them to shop and eat downtown as well. It will decrease the car use and carbon emissions by those cars by promoting walking and bike use, and decrease the need for parking as more people will be residing downtown and can walk, so they won't need to drive. And overall, it will create a more active and engaged community.
Hello, like my partner said, my name is Nayara. So I'm going to start off with talking about Section 8 because my partner referenced that. So Section 8 refers to part of the U.S. Housing and Community Development Act that was created in 1974, and it covers subsidized housing for low-income individuals. So they have a voucher program through the federal government to assist low-income families, the elderly, the disabled, and all of this helps those people to afford decent, safe, and sanitary housing in the public market. In order to be a voucher holder for Section 8, applicants have to meet a certain income guidelines and other eligibility requirements. I'm not 100% sure if they vary borough by borough, state by state. I saw quite a few different things. Typically, there is a wait list for this program. I heard recently that some boroughs and towns wait lists are shorter than others. I guess it depends. So once accepted into the program, that participant is free to choose any available housing through the program. To become a Section 8 landlord, the landlords that wants to become a landlord through the program has to contact their local public housing authority to apply. Once approved, that landlord actually selects a tenant based on their own rental criteria. They have to make sure that their housing meets the minimum standards. So for example, minimum standards include sanitary facilities, food preparation and refuse disposal, space and security, thermal environment, lead-based paint, access, site and neighborhood, sanitary conditions, smoke detectors. So a housing subsidy is going to be paid to the landlord directly by the PHA on behalf of the participating family. The family then pays the difference between the actual rent being charged by the landlord and the amount subsidized by the program. So the tenant's obligations is that when they select a housing unit, they are going to sign a lease with the landlord for at least 1 year. And then the landlord may actually be able to request a security deposit. And then they're going to continue paying their monthly dues, their monthly rents. The landlord, like mentioned earlier, they're supposed to provide their families with decent, safe, and sanitary housing. So our goals for our ordinance to increase the availability of affordable housing, protect the availability of publicly assisted affordable housing dwellings, amongst other things. We are basing our ordinance off of incentives. So similar to what my partner said, we're kind of going off of those. Our main one is new landlord signing bonuses, and others are listed there. This will be funded mainly by the community development block grants, but also Carlisle noted that they do have other funding that they would like to use for this program. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Who'd like to go first? Anybody? Questions? Jennifer, do you have a question?
Yeah, 2 questions. So a borough who would want to utilize this proposed approach, they would have to apply for the grant funding.
Carlisle already receives that grant for affordable housing. It's not specific to what, like a specific thing they have to pay for it. They can use that grant for this as like an affordable housing issue topic.
Okay. How in a borough like Camp Hill, for example, who is landlocked and might have capacity issues with, school buildings, et cetera, but you know, if this would incentivize more landlords to do it, do you see an impact on the number of families in the borough increasing? You know, would it have other ancillary impacts on other resources within the borough?
I guess potentially it could. I don't know if it'll increase the amount of landlords in general in that space. It'll just increase the amount of landlords who are willing to rent their units to Section 8 voucher holders. So whether those people might already reside in the community in other places.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if it would actually cause too much of an increase.
Is this required for any new housing development within the borough, or is this just if you choose to participate? When I first read the ordinance, again, that was the draft, I was in the impression, so say you bought an old home and converted into 5 apartments, you had to have at least 20% some one of those apartments under the affordable housing program. Is this required for any new, or, you know, say someone takes what we talked about a few presentations ago, you know, an old church and turns it into apartments, does X percentage of that have to be affordable housing?
So the borough specifically requested that this be something they choose, and it's not a requirement, and it doesn't relate to any new developers in the community being required to offer a portion of their development to Section 8 voucher holders. So at this point, the ordinance is just for the landlords who choose to rent to those voucher holders.
I think that might be step 2, depending on how well this works out.
Well, you specifically referenced vacant properties. Is there any requirement, or is there any requirement on how long a property must have been vacant for it to qualify for this program? Or can a landlord say, you know, just choose to go with this program because they could get more money and they're evicting an already existing tenant?
That, I don't think that's something we've considered before, but that's a good takeaway. And we'll look into that.
Okay, I'll just follow up with a couple questions. You have tackled a large topic, and there's probably 100 ways to go about this, because if you're probably doing your research, you probably got very confused about how different people are doing it and everything. I do want to commend you. I think what you have done, and that what I see from it, is you've gone to the carrot approach. This is a truly, like you were just talking a little bit about Faith's comment, there's the stick approach where you require so many things, but this is truly a carrot approach. The $500 that you came up with within your ordinance, I'm not sure I see it here, but then again, I don't have it all memorized. How did you arrive at that? Was that Carlisle saying we want to do 500, or did you have an idea? Was there some metrics that you thought that 500 is something that might get things going based upon a rent or numbers or something like that?
Based on our research, that was towards the lower end of what the incentives were as a sign-on bonus was, and Carlisle Borough being sort of a smaller municipality compared to the counties that we were looking at, we thought that would be a good start, and the borough didn't have any changes related to that number.
Does Carlisle have a sense of how much they might be spending on something like this?
No, not at this time.
Any other last question? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Nice job. Okay, now we get to parking.
Everyone's favorite subject.
Yeah, let's.
Good evening, everyone. My name's John Urbanski, and this is my partner, Mr. Lawrence Youngblood. Our proposal here today that we worked on was a model parking ordinance for Cumberland County for the municipalities within it. Okay. All right. So the problem in general that we were tasked with is when creating a parking ordinance, you have to figure out where are you going to do it, how are you going to do it, and obviously what the costs are. you have to balance these two things that we have up here. If you have too little parking, then businesses suffer. If we have 5 parking spots for Walmart, obviously Walmart's not going to have a lot of customers. But in the same sense too, if we put 10 acres of land for a Walmart that only gets said 5 customers, we're wasting acres of land within the municipality. So our goal by doing this was to develop a parking system with the right amount of parking for these municipalities to balance that business aspect and the growth of the municipality while being able to make sure that the land is managed right. Now, specifically to Cumberland County doesn't have a model parking ordinance. So what this means is municipalities generally do it on their own, which is fine. It's completely fine. But the issue is that we're trying to make sure that they're not using outdated information. A lot of information that these municipalities have, unfortunately, they're based off of outdated studies. And these outdated studies would mandate parking in relation to different aspects, such as the amount of employees on shift, for example. So one of the things that I've read was that a business may have to have 50 parking spaces because they need to have 2 per customer plus 1 per employee at the busiest shift. Said business may only need a total of 20 parking spots. Compounding this throughout a municipality, you can see where this starts to become a problem, where we're basically making ourselves a land of pavement, not a land of businesses, and not a land that's green either, might I say. So here's what we did. We looked at a municipality that was very similar to Cumberland, municipality within Cumberland County. There was a proposal that was done 2 years ago in Susquehanna Township, where we're here today in Dauphin County. These individuals, they were provided a chart that was from the Tri-County Planning Commission. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
And what this chart was it was basically a breakdown of what the parking should be based off of the traffic flow within Susquehanna Township. Now, what we did is we looked at Cumberland County and we said to ourselves, would this be something that would be good for Cumberland County? So we looked at Susquehanna Township. It has 25,000 people in it. We looked at some of the bigger municipalities in Cumberland County. It has 28,000 in Hampton County. East Pennsboro has 20 and Carlisle has 18,000 people. It's also within the Tri-County Planning Commission. So by having this, we believe that this would initiate inter-county cooperation in tackling bigger projects. I'm going to pass it over to my peer Lawrence here, and he's going to talk more about our ordinance and the provisions within it.
So getting into the ordinance, the first issue a lot of times is, I'm sure you all know, that municipalities face is, where do you get the authority to do something? For example, you could have the best plan, the best idea in the world, but if you don't have the authority to do it, you're going to face a major hurdle. So because this is a menu ordinance, first we have to look at the different types of municipalities within Cumberland County. First-class township, and the first-class townships code would cover them. Second-class townships code would cover your second-class townships. Borough code would cover your municipalities such as Carlisle Borough. And also through our research, we found out that there's no cities in Cumberland County, but there are several municipalities that in the future, if they wanted to, can become a third-class city, or at least would have the potential to under Pennsylvania law. So we included that in our ordinance as well. Now, while you're probably wondering, what about first-class cities? What about second-class cities? The only first-class city in Pennsylvania is Philadelphia. Obviously, there's no municipality in Cumberland County that could reach the level to become a first-class city. And also, the only second-class cities in Pennsylvania are Pittsburgh as well as Scranton, neither of which any municipality in Cumberland County would come close to. Next is the policy goals. This is the section for why we're doing this and what we want to promote. So, of course, efficient use of land. We don't want, as mentioned earlier, we don't want a situation where you have this big, huge parking lot and at most there's only a few cars in it. Also, clean air. This is more of a secondary benefit, but we think that our ordinance can potentially encourage methods such as carpooling, which would potentially reduce air pollution. Economic expansion, also as mentioned earlier, we don't want this to hurt businesses and to have them suffer. And going further, as this is a model ordinance, so it is in a menu ordinance format. The purpose of this is we want to promote options, and we don't want to force a particular municipality to have to adopt something from this ordinance that they wouldn't like. That comes up a lot with the pervious pavement provision we have in our ordinance, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So next, getting into the general requirements, you'll see in our Appendix I chart, we have a per square feet to parking ratio mathematical calculation that was done based upon Susquehanna Township a few years ago. Additional features, we want to be able to promote bicycle parking, especially if we do get in a manner to reduce cars on the road. Also shared parking lots. Basically, in the interest of time, that would be multiple businesses using the parking lot at the same time. Goals, as stated, we want to reduce wasteful land. Creating either a mandate or a future requirement would be the way to go with it. Pervious pavement, we would do that in accordance with environmental regulations as stated on the screen. And the purpose of the pervious pavement is basically it reduces stormwater runoff, which creates pollution and water issues. So as you all know, I'm sure being in local government, financial are often an issue when trying to create stuff like this. Therefore, some of the ways we would try to go with this would be tax credits for businesses if they adopt it, and then the municipality could offset that tax revenue through reducing stormwater management, also grants from state and federal government as well. And I notice my time is up. Here's our Appendix I. We could send this to you if you would like. Well, we're excited, and any questions? Also, thank you for being here today.
Okay, well, thank you for being here. You're first, if you have questions.
I don't have anything right now.
Okay. Faith, what-
You had spoken in your ordinance in the draft one that I received previously about outdoor parking spaces are not considered as being part of the open parking lot. Could you explain that a little bit?
That's a little bit more is like street parking. So if we have street parking, it wouldn't be efficient to calculate street parking as part of a business's parking. For example, let's say there's a business at the end of the street. My family owns a business in Kingston Borough. We're at the corner of it. It's called Fashion Floor. We have a couple employees. It would not be fair to count that, which we're right next to a residential area, as parking for that business, where the other residents, obviously, at the end of the street would also need that parking too. So things like that. It's just to make sure that we're not, in essence, double dipping or appropriating too much street parking towards a business when it's actually needed for other things such as residents. And in these municipalities, we're going to have those hybrid type areas, and we took that into consideration to a degree.
Jennifer, any questions? Okay, yeah, you mentioned that the Tri-County is involved with it. Yeah, we were, not to kind of too much tooting our horns. We did a lot right in here. We took a drone out, and we were right over there, actually, or I guess if I got my direction right, and we were counting parking spaces. We were working with Shippensburg University that they went out with us on Black Friday and counted parking spaces and found that there wasn't an issue. People were over parked. So this is something that's quite involved here. Couple things that we have not ever talked about before, but you have about metered parking. How did you arrive? Why did you bring that into the play? Most of the things we've seen so far don't have metered parking as identified or talked about.
So we've actually since decided to can that from our draft.
Okay, so
along with the advice of
whoops.
Cumberland County.
So I got an old one, I guess.
what we were thinking is that it would tie in. We didn't want a scenario where somebody parks, goes into a store for when they should only be there for maybe 5-10 minutes, but they're in there for
Okay.
2 hours because they're not worried about tying up a parking space. That was our original idea, but as I said, since then, we've decided to scrap it.
So
from
it's
our
been
ordinance.
out there.
And if I may add to my peers thing is one of the things, obviously, the big concern was that appropriate for this type of ordinance? And to just build on what he said we're trying to go towards efficient use of parking, because if cars are parked there for 5 hours and they leave their car parked there and then they go take off somewhere else, that's using up land that otherwise that would be useful for people to go in and out of businesses.
Right.
Now, we are going to talk back with them to see if there's something we can do to tie in that use to a degree to assist so that, so places aren't basically being thrown out with cars in them. But we don't want to create a parking lot for a parking lot's sake.
Right.
We want a parking lot for a business's sake.
Right. And this may have gotten changed as well. I apologize for maybe working off an old, you talked about the bonuses or the incentives programs. I know the way I read it is you were providing some sort of cash in a, if you, basically the incentive is if you do a green approach, is that correct?
Yes, that's one of the ways it seems like from what we've heard and what we know that a business or a municipality probably wouldn't be willing just to adopt the pervious pavement on their own, even with the sustainable and environmental benefits of it. So we wanted to use any sort of financial incentives, whether it be tax credit or grant, to encourage that as much as we possibly could.
Okay. And do you think local municipalities would do that?
I would say so. And the rationale behind it is that taking this room, for example, if we can only fit 5 people in it, but we can fit now 20 in it because this is done more efficiently, that's 20 people paying compared to 5. So by having these incentives and the way that we wrote it, the 2 sections mirror each other, A and B, but one's for an individual, as in a person, and the second would be for a business. The municipality can set what they will believe is a straight cash way of doing it, or maybe a percentage off of a property tax. So by having that additional tax revenue, by having more businesses within the municipalities, because as we say before, we're not having parking lots, we're having good viable businesses coming in the municipality, that would help offset it. And furthermore, we did add in there, we said shall, but we're changing it to may. The municipality may apply for a grant, and that way bigger municipalities who may be more proactive in doing this, they can apply for grants on behalf of individuals, that they can have a pool of money. So which then individuals can apply for this funding to create this sustainable parking. So it gives them incentives in different ways. And back to what my peer Lawrence said about it being a model ordinance, if a municipality is not comfortable with that first part, where they're giving a tax break due to maybe a financially distressed status, or Act 47 may not allow them to, maybe they can adopt a different provision that would allow them to apply for grants.
Sure. Again, I'm always a favor of carrots. Sticks are fun if you're like, want to show a strong arm, but again, carrots seem to get a little bit more things going. So, all right. Any last questions for the gentleman? Okay, well, thank you very much and appreciate it. Very nice job.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, next we have environmental justice.
Good evening, fellow peers, members of the LRB, Professor, and members of the panel. We appreciate this opportunity, Rory Burns and I, Hannah Trigger, to present to you a model ordinance regarding environmental justice. Environmental justice is a very broad topic, but we want to address overburdening communities and implementing green zones. So biggest question is, what is environmental justice? Well, it's basically fair dealings with people, communities, no matter what their race is, their origin, their sex, their income, or any ideology, and having them come in and help with the implementation, development, and enforcement of environmental regulation, laws, and policy. And why should we care? I think this pandemic has shown us why we should care. Humanity is a chain, and a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. If unintentionally or intentionally we weaken that link, we weaken the entire chain. So it is remiss to think that what happens in one community doesn't affect the other community, because it's all interrelated. So we have two visuals here. One side says, I can't breathe. I can't breathe is no longer the rallying cry for justice in the judicial system. It's also the rallying cry for minority groups who can't breathe in areas of air pollution. And then we have Lady Justice on the other side. She's been stabbed in the back by her own sword. You can see everything's out of balance. Time to restore the balance. And right here is just a visual of PM 2.5. Particulate matter 2.5 is named as such because it's particulate matter with 2.5 microns. So you can see the size of it as related to the diameter of human hair. It's theorized, and now it's common knowledge, that COVID, the virus, attaches itself to the PM 2.5 particles. And then that's how, by breathing, that's how we get it, hence the masks. And you can see right here on this map, the first one, you can see is squarely on Pennsylvania. In March of 2019, you can see the dark purplish black, that is the level of pollution, of air pollution at that time. A year later, during a lockdown, you can see it went down significantly. COVID has killed at least twice the amount of minorities as it has with non-minority people. Minorities are also 3 times more likely to have contracted it. And what contributes to that is the lack of affordable health care, the lack of adequate living spaces, and the inability to work from home. So is this fair? On this graphic, one big thing that Chester is dealing with is the Coventa incinerator. It's not fair that it's only 1.5% of the pollution that they contribute, but they're going to get most of the pollution from other states, or counties rather. This is a picture of Fruitvale, California. Fruitvale, California was an ideal example of how they took something and turned it into green space. They collaborated with BART, with the Bay Area Rapid Transit Authority. Again, public participation is key. You can see people here, Allison Hill, working on beautifying it. A little bit of green does go a long way. Diversity and inclusion and public participation. Take your choice. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rory Burns. All right, so when we think environmental justice, really we're talking about burdened communities, and even more so, we're talking about overburdened communities. So behind me, you can see the New Jersey definition for what they consider to be an overburdened community. Actually, on October 28th, so about 2 weeks ago, Governor Wolf signed in an executive order, so for the first time addressing environmental justice, and there's current legislation ongoing within Pennsylvania that is tackling this issue right now. So maybe in the near future, there will be a Pennsylvania definition put up there, but in New Jersey, there's 3 ways you can be considered a burden or overburdened community. So that's at least 35% of households qualify as low-income households. You could have 40% of residents who identify as minority, or at least 40% of households don't have a high proficiency of English, so long as there's not one fluent English speaker in the house. All right, so for us, our ordinance, we have 2 main general purposes. We want to require a person seeking a permit for a new facility, or if they want to expand an existing facility located within the burdened community, that they have to obtain, or they just seek certain requirements before they can obtain a permit to actually continue their development. Then beyond that, it's to establish green zones in these burdened communities so we can try to mitigate some of the harm that has been done in the past from, our involvement. All right, so a main factor with obtaining a permit with one of the requirements is the environmental impact assessment. So the EIA would be submitted to the township as part of a preliminary and a final plan for any kind of major subdivision or land development application. And it's just to ensure that there's gonna be some kind of adequate analysis going on with all these various factors, as you can see behind me within the burning communities. Additionally, actually within the environmental impact assessment, there will be a community impact assessment. And it's procedurally very similar, but it differs in the fact that it's going to look at it through a scope of how does it impact socially, culturally, and economically on activities and opportunities of individuals within the community itself. However, back to the EIA. So one way you can mitigate some of the negative impacts that you expect and foresee it to happen with your project, where you could do things such as tree plantings, you'd have a creation of green spaces, rain gardens, stormwater measures that reduce the runoff and particulates and similar environmentally beneficial measures, utilization of lead principles during construction, and then inclusion of any kind of buffers, green waste, and other ways that you can recycle. All right, so another area of the EIA that they will have to be using would be addressing impacts of proposed facilities. So as you can see behind me, there is additional stormwater impacts associated with impervious cover, water conservation efforts, you have truck and any other kind of traffic impacts. And there's dust control and particulate emissions, but during construction and during operations, any kind of potential for chemical releases during the construction or during the operation. Noise again, both during the construction and also during the operation, and then impact on land, water, and air. All right, so turning burdened communities into green zones, it can be very difficult. Right now, Minneapolis has communities that are going about it, and they have a good plan that shows a great model of what to follow through and how to do it. It really just adds another level of regulation to try to protect this community. And these are some factors that this is from a model in LA, which they have implemented so far. And these are things that they look at when they are going to be implementing in their green zone. You don't need me to read it all off, as I see our time is kind of ticking down. And then lastly, if there is a review process, and that's if there is some sort of unnecessary hardship. Other than that, thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, hopefully we can provide some answers.
All right, thank you very much. Very well done. Anyone questions, Jennifer? You have anything?
When you say proposed facilities, are you talking about pollution emitting facilities or any type of facility?
Major subdivision and land use projects.
All right, good. Kyle?
How many small municipalities do you see coming under the burdened community definition?
That entirely depends on the census tract, so I don't have that information on me. I know within Pennsylvania, the DEP, I believe it's the way they look at a burdened community is, well, they say a disproportionately burdened community is, I think you only need to be 20% of low income to be fitting that description. So.
I must say, you did a nice, very good job. You have, this is one of the topics that we talked about for the Tri-County, and we struggle with environmental justice all the time because of, what we do with the highway planning and everything. You could have gone 400 different directions, and I'm sure you got some direction. Did Ed Cadittle help you out there? I think.
Oh, very much.
Yeah, Ed's a great resource, and he's been involved in it for. And I think what you did was very, very smart. You took a big topic and you went and you brought it down to something that can work. And to take something like environmental justice and try to narrow it down into something that works for this class was very, very well done. to work with communities and the models that you've done to try and get some sort of green space I think is what you see is out there is very important for trying to build communities and particularly in the areas that are having the issues. Question for you though. You mentioned two, Los Angeles and Minneapolis. From your reading in those and putting them together and pulling this together, Pennsylvania's got its own unique little game with the MPC and everything else. You think this will work? Or do you think there'll be some issues that some things?
I
that
think
might-
there will be issues.
Okay, where do you think they might be?
There's already issues, if I may, there's
You may.
already issues with, there's murmurings about going back to old facilities that have permits, dredging that and seeing, actually trying to track if there was actually some sort of bias or prejudice there to fix that, to bring it into the future and actually fix that here in Pennsylvania. But it is very difficult. It's a very passionate topic. People have a lot of opinions about it, but it's necessary because we as a collective have to make a decision and we all have to work together. Because like I said, what happens in one community is definitely going to come around and happen in another. So it can be done. I think, things don't happen overnight and sometimes you fail, but you have to get back up and keep trying.
Oh, yeah.
Also to add on to that, I don't know how much faith I have in the General Assembly, but if legislation were to get passed, I think that would be a game changer as well. So very much impact that answer.
It's a carrot or a stick.
That's a good question. It's green, so I guess that's a carrot. It's buried, so you don't always see it. So
Health, that's the carrot. Health.
what is that?
Health.
Health, yeah.
Health.
And wealth, that's the carrot. And
Oh,
justice
yeah,
for all.
absolutely. I think we got some more time. We're doing pretty well, right, John?
Yeah, I was interested in the topic, and as a new member to our own borough's climate action, we were talking about environmental justice and burdened communities. So the shaded purple ones were the ones that were designated as a, burdened community with respect to us having to pay attention to what climate action things we may do. But the orange outline, though, also demonstrates the size of the borough, which is only about 2 square miles. So going back to your comment about how it's all interconnected, and given the size of a borough as small as Camp Hill, how do you decide if you're only going to do the community impact assessments or the environmental impact assessments and the community impact assessment in the purple burden areas versus requiring that everywhere?
Well, that's a good question. With air pollution, there's areas that have less pollution, there's areas that have more pollution, even within a county, within a borough, even within a house, for example. I mean, there's mold and there's dust, there's dander in homes, not to the level where it's technically pollution, but you would have to most likely sample the areas of the lower pollution levels and the area with the higher concentration. And it would also depend on what is in that area, because certain factories, certain things have a different potential to emit. So that comes into play as well.
Also, that was from the Lower Bethel Township, and that will actually applies to everyone within their township. So you could do that.
Feel good? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Very good.
Thank you very much.
All right, moving on. Our next to the last one here is ban on plastic bags.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Mutunga, and I, along with my partner, Cassidy Mason, will be leading you guys throughout the ban on plastic bags regarding the Carlisle Borough. So giving you all a little introduction, single-use plastic is extremely harmful to the environment and human health. Regarding the environment, it damages aquatic ecosystems, the organisms within these ecosystems, They ingest these materials and it leads to death or just injuries for them. And regarding their own environments, these plastics get caught up in like corals and such, and it leads to a whole lot of pollution within the aquatic ecosystems. Single-use plastic also eventually turns into microplastic, which absorbs into our agricultural products, which leads to us getting sick. And also regarding single-use plastic bags specifically, toxins such as lead, cadmium, and mercury are released when plastic bags are produced. And this leads to different birth defects, immune system suppressions, and developmental problems in children. Now, regarding the Carlisle Borough specifically, with their own mission statement, they heavily emphasized the global concerns that I previously addressed on the other slide. So those concerns, the environmental and the human health concerns, those take precedent over everything else for them. Because for them locally, single-use plastic bags aren't really an issue for the borough, but locally, obstructions to the stormwater inlets and issues at waste management are sort of an issue. Regarding waste management, whenever a plastic bag gets caught up in the facility, it gets caught up in the machinery, and the employees actually have to physically get in there and remove each plastic bag. And it's a very dangerous and time-consuming process because the whole facility has to shut down in order to retrieve that plastic bag. So for Carlisle, there's no existing ordinance, and that's because the Pennsylvania General Assembly had a preemption on plastic bags or fees relating to the bans on plastic bags and fees until August of this year. So this is the very first ordinance that they'll be having. Different places in Pennsylvania have already started to make their own ordinances, for which we have laid the foundation for our ordinance. So we're taking bits and pieces from Narberth, Pennsylvania, Westchester, Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And Cassidy will speak more about that in the ordinance portion of our presentation. Now, regarding the benefits, environmentally, it lowers pollution for stormwater operations, and greenhouse emissions are also reduced. Socially, there's a higher quality of life because when you have healthier agriculture, it leads to healthier individuals, healthier communities. There are cleaner streets, green spaces, and sidewalks, which leads to more desirable communities and neighborhoods. And economically, taxpayer money can be used for other matters, and commercial establishments in the borough can both monetarily benefit from imposing these fees. So just to prove to you all that a plastic bag ban does work, these 3 cities implemented their own plastic bag bans in 2012, 2007, and 2013. In San Jose, there was an 89% reduction in plastic bags in storm drains. In San Francisco, there was $600,000 saved per year in plastic processing fees alone. And in Seattle, there's a 48% drop in residential plastic bag waste and a 76% decline in commercial plastic bag waste. So now I'm going to hand it over to Cassidy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cassidy Mason. I'm going to talk to you specifically about the ordinance that we drafted for the Borough of Carlisle. So the Borough of Carlisle has both a short-term and a long-term goal, but we focused on the short-term goal for our ordinance, and that's to drastically reduce single-use plastic bags. In order to draft a comprehensive ordinance, you have to look at other boroughs and see what worked for them and what didn't work for them. The 2 that I specifically looked at were the Westchester Borough of Pennsylvania and also the city of Philadelphia. For the Borough of Westchester, it was a little bit broader than ours because it also covers straws, utensils, things like that. For their compliant bags, they focused on only 40% of post-consumer recycled material in their bags. And they also had a requirement in which the word recyclable, recycled, or reusable has to be highly visible on the bag. For their exemptions, they had an exemption in which the borough committee looks at different written requests that are sent in from commercial establishments saying, we have an undue hardship, please don't put this ban on us right away. And then they can decide whether or not that ban will have a delay and start 1 year later. So the second municipality we really looked at was the city of Philadelphia. Their applicability is the same as ours. It only looks at bags for right now. For their compliant bags, it is also 40% post-consumer recycled material, but it also added
that no old growth fiber can be in the bags. And then a really unique exemption that I adapted word for word from them that we really, really loved was, you know, those flimsy bags you carry your produce in, your bakery, your meat, those are still permissible because sanitary reasons, and it's just easier for you to get things like that. So now looking at our ordinance in particular, again, only for plastic bags for us right now. Hopefully in the future, they can go to utensils and straws like that. For our compliant bags, if they are paper, they have to be 40% of post-consumer recycled material, or they can be from cloth, hemp, fabric, or any other material that's machine washable and made for multiple uses. We also adopted a signage requirement. This basically says that when you go into a commercial establishment, there has to be at the point of sale conspicuous signage that says, we will no longer be issuing plastic bags to our customers, and this will take effect 30 days before our ordinance goes into effect, basically to put people on notice. So if you go into a store and you see that 30 days before, you know within a month, they won't be giving me a plastic bag anymore. I either have to bring one or I have to buy a compliant bag. For our exemptions, we also have the 1-year undue hardship delay. We think that is something that could really help commercial establishments who aren't able to move right into this ordinance. And we also have an exemption for people who are on subsidized state or federal food programs. They will receive the 15-cent compliant bags for free. Lastly, violations and enforcements. This is more the stick than the carrot. Initially, they will get an initial written warning, but then first is a fine of $150, then $250, and then $500. They all stack up within the year. So if the second violation is within the same year, that's when the $250 is added to the $150. But if these happen in a separate year, it starts over. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciated our time with the Borough of Carlisle and working with Joel Hicks in particular. If you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very well done.
How many right now?
Don't have it. Okay, we'll get back. Yeah. Faith?
Yeah, I do have one. So in your research, did you find what were some of the reasons for requesting an exemption? And I'm just thinking, is it businesses that cater to, senior citizens? Is it, I'm just, if anything jumped down at you on that area.
A couple that we noticed were the mom and pop shops. You don't really want to put an undue burden on shops like that who are really struggling, especially in times like these as well. But I don't know if there's any other specifics that you saw besides that.
When we spoke to Joel Hicks, like roughly a week ago, he was bringing up the topic of having food stall vendors. So people like that, where they're not in the borough a whole lot of the time, and they just need like a little bit more help, a little bit more time just to follow the ordinance. That's also another example.
Interesting.
Regarding I have 2 or 3 questions regarding enforcement and violations. Would that be up to the codes officer? How do you foresee that being enforced?
So Joel Hicks in particular, he wants to create a new chair on the borough's committee that's just for sustainability, and that person will oversee everything. They're still working out the little kinks in that as to what it will be called, but it will be one single person, and then they will have the back of the entire borough staff to help them as well.
So that person hypothetically would be visiting businesses and potentially citing them for bag use?
Correct. And also, when you buy a compliant bag at a store, that 15 cents is printed on your receipt. So it gives you a hard black and white proof that you're either following protocol or not.
Is the violation or the penalty amount significant enough to matter to?
Yeah, we actually, most of them were between 75 and 100 for the first one, just like to give you an example. So we're above and beyond most of them to try to, implement the stick more to stop people from doing this.
And my final question, for the retailers that are changing to the bags recommended, do you see them passing on costs to their patrons?
Sorry, one more time, what was the question?
For retailers who are moving on and using the bags that are recommended and required under the ordinance, are they passing those costs on to their patrons who are patronizing their business and having to provide the proper bag?
Right. So I think when we were talking to Joe as well, he wanted the businesses to front the costs.
And then eventually, when you do impose the fees, like you should get the money back eventually when the consumers start buying more of the bags. But in the beginning, the businesses themselves are going to front the costs. And that's why we had the exemptions, just for people who have like that financial difficulty of, we can't meet this just yet, just give us a little bit more time. So, yes.
Your example of a different type of ordinance than what we just had. With the previous ordinance, you had such a wide thing. This one, you did a really good job. You have a specific topic and you nailed it. You nailed it. You went straight in, you found what was all the different options, the obstacles, and I think you did a very, very fine job. Because it's putting it down on paper is going to be good for people like the municipalities, because you're doing the research for them. I think for the people who are up here, who are going to be on the commissions or whatever, then they have to decide politically whether they can do something like that. I think the question of being the $500 or whatever the fine thing is a very good one. Again, kind of expanding on that. Do you think Carlisle's going to be able to get the penalties in? I mean, do you think that's going to be something? Because, and do they expect some blowback on it? Because politically, this, as you could see, the state had a, stoppage of this, and what does Carlisle anticipate, maybe as an example for these people who may be considering, or other communities that may be considering doing something similar?
First off, thank you for your feedback. We really appreciate that.
And by the way, everybody's done it. I'll get everybody's done great.
Secondly, so Carlisle does think they'll be able to implement it. There will be pushback. The Borough Sustainability Committee definitely thinks there will be. But at the end of the day, you see $500 for a third and subsequent violation. You think that's not much for a place like Giant or like that. But it's all like moral optics. You don't want to look like that company that isn't following the rest, especially if you have people like a mom and pop shop who is. So we're hoping that these violations and enforcement will be enough. But it's all a matter of Carlisle tweaking it, what they need.
And do you think Carlisle will have the commitment to have a bag police?
Have a what?
A bag policeman, in essence, the zoning officer who comes in. And I think that's something like the people who sit on the boards and decide whether or not enforcement is something that's going to be.
I personally think they possibly could. I mean, they definitely are going really far one way. We initially wanted to have some plastic bags be permissible, like the big ones that you would get from Aldi or like that. And they don't want plastic at all. So I think that Carlisle is really dedicated to this topic. And I think that they're going to put the people in place to make sure that those commercial establishments are following this ordinance.
And if I could add on, there's already an individual working with the borough. Her name is, I think, Tamla Trussell. She's in charge of moving past plastics. And she knows like completely like everything about plastics. She's given us so much feedback on our ordinance. And I think if anything, she will have a whole lot of say as to, making sure that these organizations follow our rules.
Anyone else? You're good? Okay, well, congratulations and thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, last but not least, we are going off to the land of wind farms.
Yeah. Sorry. Hi, everybody. My name's Caitlin Burke, and my partner Kelly Dell and I were tasked with creating a model wind farm ordinance for the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors. So currently, energy generation in Pennsylvania, the top three are natural gas, nuclear power, and coal. Renewables only account for 4% of energy generation in the Commonwealth, and wind energy generation is less than 1%. So there are 26 wind farms in Pennsylvania. They generate 1,500 megawatts of energy, and that's enough to power 350,000 Pennsylvania households. To put that in perspective, the 2019 census estimated 5 million Pennsylvania households. So it really needs to pick up to meet that demand. There was a fast start to wind farm energy generation in the Commonwealth. In 2006, the Department of Environmental Protection had a model ordinance created, but since then there hasn't been a model ordinance. What you see here is Waymart Wind Farm in Wayne County. It was one of the first wind farms in Pennsylvania, and it's been operating since 2003. So a few of the issues that are being experienced are expansion. Like I said, there was a fast start, but relatively slow growth. There's a lot of community pushback with noise pollution, aesthetic pollution, and then decommissioning as far as the decommissioning cost and as well as sustainably decommissioning these wind farms. The DEP ordinance requires 25% of the cost to be held in trust, but they're finding that that's not a lot or enough to meet the cost. So we looked at 2 counties that had a model ordinance that was different from the DEP ordinance, Cumberland and Mifflin County. They had more provisions and they had stricter decommissioning provisions. So they require 100% of the cost, decommissioning costs be held in trust or bond. This takes the ease off the municipality. They know where the cost is going to come from, who's going to pay for it when decommissioning happens. And they both had differing noise provisions. Mifflin allowed the townships to choose, and Cumberland had it at 45 AE measured decibels. So what you're looking at now is a bunch of wind turbine blades being buried in a landfill. That's currently how the majority of blades are decommissioned and how they're dealing with them. So it's been thought that you can't recycle, reuse, can't do anything with these blades because they're made of resin and it's not usually recyclable. But Global Fiberglass Solutions found a way to recycle 99% of the blade. They create eco pellets and they make flooring, walls, stuff like that, and recycle these. Rewind is a US and Ireland initiative that uses the blades for roofs, for affordable housing, for pedestrian bridges, a lot of repurposing. A few of the setbacks, like I said, community interference, aesthetic pollution, and then the environmental impacts. The Centerville, Michigan ordinance has an extensive environmental impact analysis before a permit is even issued for a wind farm. And Kelly's going to discuss some of the solutions that we created in our ordinance dealing with offshore and abandoned mine land locations, alternative decommissioning, and then giving municipalities the option rather than just setting in stone what has to be done.
Okay, so without sacrificing Pennsylvania's natural beauty, we can make efforts to create a greener state and by using wind farms. The current wind farm ordinances in place reflect the need to mitigate various interferences. Sound guidelines, for example, maintain a limit on the decibel level while the wind turbines are in operation. Caitlin mentioned some varying ranges, and our ordinance addresses those being set at 55 decibels. Aesthetic concerns of wind farms are addressed by limiting the colors of the turbines to a natural color. Setbacks requiring at least 1 turbine length away from a non-participating landowner's property line and the road should help address concerns of shadow flicker and ice throw. All ordinances also address wildlife and require an avian and bat study to be conducted, but none currently specify a length for that study. Finally, a decommissioning plan is provided in each ordinance, but each have wide-ranging requirements. So we hope to streamline the application permit process, implement the best practices from other states, consider a more holistic cradle-to-grave approach in the planning process, and offer a comprehensive decommissioning plan. The slide you saw, the picture that you see with the blades in a landfill, while it's not toxic, we are trying to avoid taking up landfill space. So currently, there are, Caitlin mentioned, some ways you can recycle, and we'd like to build on that technology. So the life cycles of wind turbines last from 25 to 40 years. So within that span of time that it would be commissioned and in operation, we'd like to have our ordinance, or the people that adopt this ordinance, review with every 5 years, along with the decommissioning cost, to reevaluate the technology that's currently available to address the decommissioning plan. So the current innovations that you see for decommissioning include recycling the turbine blades for cement manufacturing, composite panels, railroad ties, and vehicle parts. Our ordinance also it hasn't, the draft you may have doesn't address funding, but there are both federal and state funding incentives for both private landowners and the manufacturers. So this information here comes from a website called desire.org. And this is just a brief snapshot of, there are 93 different available programs that for clean energy specifically. Grants and loans can be used for the project costs that include permit fees, administrative costs, project planning, construction, or renovation of a building to manufacture, the wind components and systems, and equipment purchases for the manufacture of wind systems. So it's pretty comprehensive what you can use, and the grant and loan amounts are pretty substantial. So in order to reduce the amount of reliance on fossil fuel energy for electricity, I think Pennsylvania can really be a leader in the country for alternative energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very well done. Would like to go first on our last people here.
Well, I just think you make a really interesting point. I think a real strength in this is the every 5 years to reevaluation the decommissioning technology, because I actually just read something the other day of wind turbines that have little panels that go like this all around instead of the big fans that go around. So, I mean, it's changing constantly. So I think that was really smart to put something like that in there.
Question?
Good for now.
Good, okay, yeah. Well, again, you have another example of another type of thing. So again, each one of you has something similar, uniquely, but I think what you've done well is you've taken something that's already out there and added better parts to it. The decommissioning portion of it, things like that are kind of key. As mentioned here, the technology is changing very much, and whether it's wind farms, or if someone would have taken solar panels, all these new energy programs are constantly changing, and things are fast. So again, talking from people up here, we're always behind the 8 ball because we can't move very fast. So something like this, having the resources that you provide, the ideas that are out there, very good. I do have one quick question that's I won't go too long on it here, just a point, if I can find it right here. You mentioned recycling. And I may not have the most recent version, and you talk about decommissioning. Have you thought about putting some provision in there that if they recycle it, they get a reduction of their bond or something like that?
We haven't discussed it, but I think it's something to consider, just because we do want to decommission these in a sustainable way. We don't want them to be buried in landfills across the country. So that is something we will consider. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, it's, again, just a couple ideas. And again, you may have come across hundreds that you thought, great, no, yeah, but again,
That was
that's-
actually something I hadn't seen in the various research and other ordinances that we have looked at. So I think that's actually really beneficial.
I'll let you take credit for it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Just a point of clarification from my standpoint, what is the zoning vehicle you're pushing this through? Like, is it only on in certain zoning districts, or is it going to be, would be like an overlay? What is?
I've seen it both in overlay. I think primarily we'd like to eliminate any sort of potential for deforestation. So we want to stay off of like prime ag lands or prime forest areas, nature areas that are heavily, needed. So I think that conditional, I think we had looked at, and overlay was another one that I had seen in other ordinances as well. So.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, well, thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you.
John's coming to kick us off, so, and I know you have classes to go to. By the way, you'll probably be the nicest dressed in your class, so use that to your advantage.
Just want to thank our panelists once again for coming here and doing this. Maybe we ought to give them a round of applause as well. That concludes a wonderful program. Thank you all very much.
And
And,
just one thing before you finish.
Please.
Do you have any last comments? Would you like to say anything else? Anybody else? I would just like to say, I've been doing this for 5 years. This group of presentations were the best. You were very concise. Everybody did a nice job. They stuck to the thing. Now, maybe because we had a shorter time period, but I do want to commend you as a class that you did a very nice job. I also want to commend you that I came out of every one of these presentations learning something.
Me too.
Because that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I feel like I'm teaching, but this time around, I learned something on everyone, and I want to give everyone a really well done. And again, you did a lot of work, and it is apparent from the presentations and everything. So I want to congratulate everyone. And whenever you come into your municipalities and you're an attorney, remember, I was kind of nice to you. So, again, that's my, I don't know if anybody else has anything.
I was just going to ask, now that you said something, any rest of you folks want to say anything? Any concluding? No,
No,
you're not obliged.
it was very informative, and thank you all for your presentations.
Do they, by show of hands, do you have an intention of going into municipal type field of law, or is everybody undecided?
Yeah.